Guys, bet I do. I'm making some new maps for Overcast, or at least I have a boatload of ideas for them. Bet I do Tree of Life 2020, Tree of Life 2K21.
Please, bring it back.
Nick and I were on for the first time the other day, and I flew in front of one of the, like, because my username's different. I flew in front of one of the, like, current admins, former, like, mods and developers.
Yeah.
And he's like, hold on, is that Stealth 5061? And proceeded to set next like 10 of my maps, including Tree of Life. And I was, yeah, it was a mad nostalgia trip. It was a good time. For those of you who don't know, which is probably most of you, I used to be a staff member on this Minecraft PvP server called Overcast Network, and aside from moderation, which I admittedly didn't do all that much of, I made PvP maps. And between the ones I collaborated on with other builders and ones I made myself, I'd say I participated in at least 50 different worlds that were either tested or playable on the public servers. Now, I remember most of the maps I've worked on, but one that really stands out to me is Tree of Life, which is the first map I made and submitted to the, I believe, then called Project Ares forums on the website. And I actually made it with MC Edit, which I wasn't especially proficient with, not that I was proficient at building in general, but the map kind of came out looking like a tube with a bunch of balls floating around it. I don't know what was going through my head when I decided to make it a DTC, or Destroy the Core map, but the first version of it actually caught fire because of the lava in the core. And then I made some updates to the map in hopes of invigorating the gameplay, at least a little, and it really didn't do much. I think it was kind of beyond saving just based on the design. Just because it was the first one that was accepted, I was really excited at the time. I mean, I was like, what, 13, 12? I don't remember what age exactly, but it holds a special place in my heart. As a kind of an ode to all my years of map making, and as a thank you to, I guess, everyone who's helped me along the way, I decided that I'd record the design and construction of Tree of Life 10th anniversary, and yes, it's been almost 10 years. What you're gonna see in a few seconds here is a voiced over time-lapse of my building. Hopefully this will provide some insight into my thought process and building techniques for those of you who are interested, and at the very least, some entertainment for those of you who are just tuning in for fun. So, without further delays, I'll jump right into it. This is the start of the new map I worked on over the past few weeks. Things started off a little bit shaky, because, for one, I hadn't used worldedit at this point for probably 5 years. And also, I was working on, I was recording this on my desktop computer and working on my laptop computer, my old quote-unquote gaming laptop, which is, needless to say, kind of outdated as far as hardware goes. And also, I just wasn't used to the keyboard and so on and so forth. So, just in general, things started out a little bit slow here. I also ended up redoing the size of the main island here a few times over, as you'll see. Just doing some basic terraforming right now with a cylinder brush. I guess it would have been helpful if I showed the little mini map sketch thing that I prepared before making this, but when I started doing this, I already had a pretty clear idea for the structure of the terrain. What I wanted to do was a King of the Hill map with the main control point being in the pit you see in the middle of the screen right now, and then one control point on either side of it. Each one of those is weighted towards one team ever so slightly, so you'll see the one furthest from the camera right now is slightly closer to the right side of the screen. So that's going to be one team's control point. And also I've designed the terrain kind of around giving the team an advantage, that specific team an advantage over that control point. The central control point is going to be most contested, is what I expect to happen. But obviously the teams can grapple over the two flanking control points as well. It'll be interesting to see what kind of dynamic emerges from that. I should apologize because this is my first time filming a time-lapse like this ever, which for one is really interesting because I've never seen myself build like this. Two, I made a lot of probably rookie mistakes. One being that my camera, being an account I borrowed from one of my friends to record with, moves ever so often. I kind of got a system down for aiming the camera consistently as time progressed, as I spent more time with this process. Okay, so I guess I can kind of describe what's going on right now. You'll see I've started terraforming the two flanking islands, and I added the spawn island, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now. For the standard floating island look, I ended up using terraforming, I don't know, algorithm, I guess, a terraforming algorithm available in worldedit plugin, or worldedit. See, I don't know what the term for it is. There's like a mod for worldedit, a mod for a mod that adds like a whole bunch of fancy masks and terraforming, terrain generation options. So I was using that to create like the spikes, and then just flipping it upside down and sticking it below the island. So that's how I've achieved those results. Right now, again, still doing terraforming. I'm kind of making the island so that it's not just a complete circle. Now I'm adding some variation along the edges. I added some, I guess, depth to like where the water falls off there. Well, I guess I never actually stated those. The two dips below the islands, those are going to be lakes, as per kind of the original Tree of Life. And Tree of Life Mini, I've always had like a lake on the island with some significance. I cut out a lot of this terraforming because some of it took place like on the other side of the island that you can't actually see from this angle, and below like it is right now. I've also added in the control point banners, hill banners, whatever you want to call them. And I've chosen A for the primary control point and X and Y, the secondary control points. You might be asking why I didn't just do an A, B, and C. I chose X and Y because they're both symmetrical letters, so I wouldn't have to make the banner too thick for each team to be able to understand it. And right now A is just kind of floating there, and you'll see I had plans for these when I built them, but the tree is non-existent at this point. I spoke too soon, there it is. But yeah, they're going to be attached to the tree somehow, you'll see. I also added in the water while I was just talking about that. But yeah, moving on to the tree here. I had a lot of fun with the roots here. I think you could kind of see this technique emerging. Not necessarily technique, but the appearance emerging in Tree of Life Mini. But having like the roots kind of twisting around the base, and like having the base of the tree actually like elevated from the ground, and then some roots like going in the ground and curving out. I always like having like pathways that go under roots that jut out of the ground and back in, like the one closest to the bottom on the screen right now. Oh, I'm also building this in blue wool. I started building with the spruce wood, and I realized it was like too dark to see any contours of the tree, so like I couldn't see what I was building exactly. So I switched it to blue wool so I could get a better read on the physical structure of the tree. You can see I'm doing a lot of cleaning up by hand right now. And it looks kind of strange because it's just cut off at the top right now as well. I wasn't really sure what to do with the starting islands for a little while, but then I happened upon the idea of a hot air balloon. I'm not sure how exactly, but that's where this is going. I think you could kind of see that shape emerging already. And also kind of a cliche look for the hot air balloon here. I realized that, I guess, while I was building it, but kind of like a tarp draped over the top with points of the I don't really know how to describe it, but yeah, like parts of the tarp like draping down and then lights hanging from those. And then I added this weird wooden crown thing that isn't very realistic, but I thought it looked interesting. I guess I was thinking of putting like maybe cargo up there, but I never actually got around to that. So I also realized at that point, or decided, not necessarily realized, that the balloon I was building was a little bit too big, so I went ahead and just did the same thing but a little bit smaller. Yeah, the spawn platform, which is, you'll see shortly, is what I built from the bottom of this balloon, is a little bit small. So I had to add in barrier blocks to prevent, out of concern for players just like falling off the edge when they first start. Hopefully that's not too much of a problem. I don't expect it to be. Right here I was trying to work in some like rope, I don't know if I want to call it skirt or like rope fastenings or something under it, and I struggled a little bit with this for a while, but I came out with something that I was happy with, so that's the important part. You'll see shortly, I make quite a few changes to this basket, minor but many changes like throughout the course of this video. But you'll see, yeah, right here, I tried copy and pasting the balloon to like put it in position. And I used / lazy cut. It was like, okay, yeah, lazy cut's safer to use. So I'm like, all right, I'll try using this. And then this happened because I pasted it, realized I didn't like the position, undid it, pasted it again, and it pasted like 20% of the blocks, maybe less. It was just that like awkward little platform there. And thankfully, I don't know exactly what I did, but I think I logged out and logged back in, and I got my original clipboard back. But I thought I had lost like all the progress I had made on that basket balloon thing. But yeah, that resolved itself, so I guess water under the bridge. This looks ridiculous right now. What I decided to do is, I thought the tree was looking a little, not necessarily bland, but just too vertical and I guess uninteresting. Simultaneously, I realized that with I don't know if it's just with the new version of worldedit or with the plugin mod for worldedit, but I realized you can rotate selections at like any degree increments, like down to like decimal place increments. So what I did was I basically made a 1 block high selection that I just used, or I just moved progressively up the tree. So just basically sliced it into a bunch of horizontal slices and rotated those at, I don't know if it was 5 or 15 degree increments, but basically made the whole thing into like this helix pattern, which you can totally see emerging at this point. I obviously had to clean it up a lot because rotating blocks at uneven angle increments is not perfect, but it created this really, really nice look for the tree in the center, which I wanted to look different from a normal tree, of course. It's the tree of life, so, you know, it's not your average tree. Got some spikes coming in there, which I later did away with, because, I don't know, I just wasn't feeling it. I also applied the first control point banner in context, you'll see there. It's kind of like draped over the front of the tree, or the base of the tree. I'm also moving on to building a bunch of small trees to decorate the islands. I'm not sure who it was in chat on the Overcast community map dev Discord, but someone said like, oh, we don't like maps that use the default trees, and I guess I took offense to that. Not that I would have used the default trees, but like, I had that in mind the entire time I'm doing this. I'm like, I gotta prove this guy wrong. So I built 7, I think 7, well, I guess it ended up being 8 because there's one that's gonna go on the player's spawn island there. 8 custom trees, which I'm pretty pleased with. I get, this is like, I I hadn't built anything in Minecraft, or like built on this scale in Minecraft for a long time, much less done anything organic just in general. Like if you look at my previous maps, a lot of them are like pretty structural. And I guess like I had obviously been building stuff on my own time, like between when I stopped playing Overcast and when I started just recently. But I'd never done something organic on this scale, so that was this was a really, really good experience as far as kind of pushing my limits as a builder. So I cut those trees out of the middle of the map, just kind of floating there, and replaced the wool and did some block variation in the leaves there. You'll see I'm redoing the spawn island because apparently I wasn't happy with it, and I think for good reason. So I'm making it look a little more consistent with the main island. I also added that little segment to the left side, left middle, is like breaking off. And you'll see I'm at some point I'll build that 8th custom tree that is like holding that piece onto the island. And yeah, same technique coming into play here, where I set up a base that's just like the contour of what I've built of the island so far, and then I terraform an area and just drop it, flip it, and paste it below the island. And this is for that little section that's falling off there. I tried not to rely, well, I don't think I ever really relied on just the results of the terrain generation. But there were times where I probably should have just not messed around with what it generated so much. Like I kind of got obsessive about terraforming below the islands, which is not, like, you're not really gonna see that, so it's not too important, and I don't think that was a good use of my time, but it's whatever, it's fine, it turned out well, I think. Got the balloon pasted in there. Yep, here comes that 8th tree. Using similar process as the other ones, although I built it at kind of an angle, so it looks a little more affected by gravity, I suppose. I think this was the first tree I also worked in. I did an alternate block replacement for the leaves that I was a lot more happy with, which is why I just used those diamond blocks there. I don't know what I was thinking of doing here. Well, I knew what I was trying to do. Okay, so I wanted to build like a ring of like ruins like around the edge of the island, so I guess the one way I thought to do that was, well, I guess it's coming up here in a little bit, but I basically made a ring of sand and just, yeah, okay, now you can kind of see what I'm trying to do. I made a ring of sand, used revolve to get those points around the circle. Didn't like that apparently, so I went to just kind of, no, I did like that at the time. Rotated it, realized I didn't like it, undid it, and then came in with this stupid sand strategy. And dropped the different ruins around the... I don't know what the hell's going on, man. It wasn't a very good strategy. There's definitely many better ways I could have executed this. Finally throwing in some grass there, it's starting to look more alive, I suppose. Throwing in some sand. I also did, I forget what I did for the edges of the terrain there, but I liked the effect it had, so I threw in some green clay. I spent way too much frickin' time trying to figure out the right commands for generating bushes around the islands. I'm not even sure what I ended up doing, because I wouldn't be able to replicate it if I tried, but I laid down some gold blocks for pathways, and then put sand on top of the... No, you know what? I scrapped all that, apparently. And then I put the paths down so that the bushes wouldn't generate, like, where I wanted the paths. And then I did something like this. And I guess I did a lot of the bushes by hand, or kind of cleaned up the bushes by hand. I think it would have been faster if I had just, like, I cut out footage there. That's cut down even. I think it would have been faster if I had just built all the bushes by hand, which I was trying to avoid by using the commands. But again, I guess it's a wash because it turned out okay in the end. I used a little bit of a weird technique there where I put down bases for the bushes, then used the above mask to put down a few more layers on the bushes so it wouldn't look like they're just chunks of leaves. Another thing I spent way too much time on, you'll see very shortly that I went through like 10, 12, 14, 16 iterations of this before I settled on one I like. Yep, there's the first. So I just make one, copy and paste it over there, then repeat the process. I probably should, in retrospect, I probably should have just like put this down and come back to it, because I clearly wasn't making anything I was especially happy with. But obviously I put a lot of thought into the control points because I wanted them to be like, I guess, on brand with the rest of the map, but I also wanted them to be like instantly recognizable as, okay, this is a control point, or this is a hill I need to capture. Unfortunately, you'll never get to see in this footage the center control point, but I'm especially happy with how that one turned out. It looks consistent with the design I came up with for the 2 flanking control points. You'll see. I'll fly through it at the end of this video so you can get a look. Right now I'm building different iterations of those little monuments that I've put around the circumference of the islands. At this point, I was trying to make these obelisks, whatever you want to call them, monuments, like directional, so they'd all point in at the tree, but that didn't really work especially well. It would have been fine if it was at like 45-degree increments, but I don't know what I'm gonna use 22.5-degree increments, so some of those angles get really awkward looking. Eventually I just settled for these little vertical beams. Yeah, I replaced them all here. I wanted to do a little bit of work, or a little bit of footage from the underside of the map, but as I've said, it's kind of difficult to do this, understandably, because I was kind of just digging through the existing blocks. This is the most interesting point, though. This isn't a control point. It's just below the center control point. It's where iron blocks are going to be spawned. They're going to drop via spawner. Alright, so moving back to the tree construction, it's actually getting some branches now. And I wanted to continue the helix pattern that I had developed earlier. And it's going to look really strange from this angle, especially early on. But yeah, I worked in the helix pattern coming from those kind of channels that I've developed around the tree already. I just started with a basic like sphere, different size sphere brushes to get the tapered look of the branches. I had to do a lot of cleanup by hand, and the first time, well, I wouldn't say the first time around, but when I first, like, quote-unquote finished this area, I like took a step back and realized that all the branches ended at the same height, which was not intentional. It just kind of happened like that, and it looked really, really silly, because that's not how trees work. They don't just grow up to a certain height and then just have leaves, like a flat row of leaves across the top. So I had to go in and fix that with some interesting techniques that weren't perfect, but I think I did a good job with my current understanding of worldedit. Yeah, now you can kind of see it a little bit better now that I've rotated it, and those branches coming out at the ends there. There we go. Yeah, I fixed it so it looked more helical. It was really cool looking down at the top of this once I had finished it, like before the leaves were on, because it had that. It looks really, really nice in relation to the helical pattern of the tree. I guess I never mentioned I'm using redstone blocks as like worldedit markers. So all these little frame things just floating in the air, especially the one that's kind of taking up a lot of space in the screen. I use those to like mark regions that I'd select consistently for like rotating the map, so I wouldn't have to like put blocks down every time. There we go. Now you can kind of see, well, you can see what I was planning on doing with the banners, which is having them hang from branches. Initially, I don't think I did anything to the branches they're hanging from, but eventually I made the decision that it would make more sense for these branches to be kind of distorted under the weight of this banner. So I think at least one of them is very clearly bent downwards in the final version. Like, it took me way too long to realize the flat top tree. Oh, there's the Y coming in there. Yeah, so I got the X and the Y. And as you can see, I think now that it's been a little bit distorted. Here, I thought it'd be a really good idea to make a bunch of little, I guess, hanging leaf brushes using the same technique that I used for the undersides of the island. So I made these little hanging things, replace them with leaves, and then realized that our server has a worldedit brush size limit, and that was the smallest brush I could do. So I started putting it down, realized it looked really, really dumb, got rid of it all, and then proceeded to move some of the branches up, or move some of the branches around. For one, the tree from the top was a little bit uneven. It was more of like an oval. The branches branched out to an oval as opposed to more of a circle, as you'd expect. So I cleaned up a little bit of that, raised some of the branches up here, using diamond blocks to separate those branches. I've moved on to the tree canopy here, which I started with leaves, and then realized that if I misplaced one of my brush strokes, it would have ended up somewhere on the island below, and I would have been reliably able to replace the leaves, so I used some sort of prismarine block. I'm not sure what it's called. This first iteration of the canopy isn't great. As you can see, I'm kind of struggling with the outside appearance of it. I threw down a whole extra layer of leaf balls around it and just started using the smooth tool all over the place, and just... The problem here is that I just made it essentially a giant bowl cut on the tree. It has no definition, no depth. It's just a giant mass of leaves, and that's not how trees usually look. Try it any like hanging parts of the trees, as I had planned for from the start, just wasn't working out. Very shortly, you'll see I get rid of the whole thing and start from scratch, and I'm glad I did that, because this doesn't look very good. Here we scrap the whole thing again, start with balls on the ends of the branches. I made these into like the branches that ended at like similar heights into their own like little sections here. I think you can see that emerging here. I really didn't do... Like, the first time around, I was worried about, like, having to terraform, for lack of a better word, the entire, like, top, like, all of the leaves up there. But this final version, I didn't really do all that much terraforming, because, as you just saw there, I threw, like, a layer of, like, 40% leaf, 60% air around it, so it kind of looked like the leaves were branching out, I guess. I got distracted because there's some stupid strategy I was using with sand to try and determine... it's hard to explain this part. This is a similar process to what I did for the underside of the islands, but as you can see, it's a lot more involved. Hence a whole bunch of different block colors that... Oh god, that does not look pretty. Maybe I can explain in depth in another video, but basically when you run the terra-gen command, at least the one from the plugin we're using, it's blocked. It only terraforms on like the highest available block, so leaves that were under other leaves were not getting the little dangly vine things. So that's why I put down the gold, and then the diamond block areas there were areas that were blocked by leaves above, and then I was able to terraform on above the diamond block specifically. So you see, I've flipped the whole thing, pasted it onto the tree, and then I used the glowstone to clean stuff up. I just put down the glowstone where I thought leaves needed to be, and then replaced it with the same block variation ratio. Okay, so here's the next significant part, which is the underside of the main island, it's currently flat. So once again, same technique I used for the smaller islands, but on a much larger scale. So I ended up kind of having to terraform. Yeah, I did terraform to begin with to get like the general contour of the island. I wanted it to taper down to I wanted the middle to be the lowest part, as you'd expect from a floating island like this. I don't know if I can say that. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, I wanted it to taper down to the middle, so that's what this process is. In retrospect, I probably spent way too much time cleaning up the terraforming here, because it was just, in the end, overwritten by TerraGen. Now, starting to implement some of the TerraGen technique I've talked about already. This first iteration didn't make it too far, because I don't know why. I guess I just didn't think it was especially clean. You can see I just ran the command a whole bunch of times to just try to get the right seed. Or a good seed that would respond to how I wanted the terrain to look. And then there's this, I don't know how to explain this. I'm sure there's a command to do this, to get all the gravel to fall, or to, like, I don't know. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, regardless of what it is, but basically made that whole thing into gravel, and then just made all of the gravel fall by placing blocks next to it to update it. So that was a really slow process, but you know, even after how much I've played this game, getting gravel to fall like that is still fun, so I'm not complaining. Now, basically what I did here, and I did it on the other one, but it wasn't as clear because I didn't use the different block types, but I used the different, I set blocks of different elevations to different types. So for example, I think the bedrock was the lowest elevation, stone's the highest. And so I used a terraforming command of lower height at those lower elevations at the bedrock level, and then made it progressively higher as I got to the different materials. And all that is using, well, again, it's just the terraform command, but I also masked it above those blocks that I just mentioned in particular using the above mask. I think it's a little intimidating if you describe all these different masks to people, but once you start using them in practice, it makes a whole lot more sense. Here's me being obsessive over terraforming again, that most people are never going to see unless they fly into the island as an observer or they fall out of the world. At any rate, I spent way too much time on that. And here's the final flip. I copied the whole thing, pasted it onto there, replaced all the clay with stone. Right here I'm adding in these little, I don't want to call them cracks in the tree, but these little instances of, that's not glowstone, whatever the prismarine light source is, in the like seams of the tree, which I think has a really, really cool effect. Like once all the wool's replaced with actual wood, I think you'll be able to appreciate it more. I guess the only reason I haven't replaced the wood up until this point was because I wanted it to be like like a big thing, like a big celebratory thing. Like, oh, I just finished the map. I get to replace all the ugly blue wool with the wood it's intended to be. And it's still not replaced. I'm doing that middle island right now. With I don't know what the hell I was doing here. It ended up looking a lot different from this too, because I pasted it in and realized it looked just stupid. So there was a lot of small changes that I still need to make, and changes like within the tree and underground that just wouldn't make any sense to try to record. So the map's gonna change a little bit from its current state before it's actually released, and I obviously need to build the observer spawn and probably get rid of the redstone guides that are floating around the map. I also have some other aesthetic details that are totally unnecessary to actually getting this map like up and running. Stuff like swirling clouds around the base of the map that I've already talked about with Rocky Mine, who was giving me some feedback on this the other day. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up my map making process there. I know I didn't really talk about gameplay all too much, but I assure you it was in much more consideration than it was when I made all the maps 5 or 6 or 8 years ago. I think it's 8's probably a better estimate. Yeah, I didn't think about gameplay that much back then. Like, maybe I thought I was thinking about gameplay, but none of the maps play like exceptionally well. Stuff like long shots and exception, because like I did the aesthetics on that, and Kasi Crafter came up with the original idea and kind of handled the gameplay elements, so I followed his lead on that. I'm sure some of you have already picked up on the fact that this map has changed much more than a little since I concluded the time-lapse recording there. But I'll try to summarize it by saying that I was hoping to have this map completed by the end of the summer. That didn't happen. I lost access to the laptop I was using to record from a second perspective, and I got exceptionally busy with fake college and whatnot. But since winter break started recently, I've been able to sit down and devote a significant amount of time to resolving some of the ideas that I had that I was never able to address over the summer, rounding off a few corners and making a few more changes, maybe a little more than a few. But yeah, I'm making this recording on January 1st, 2022, which is especially fitting because I joined Project Ares in 2012. So it actually has been 10 years, not necessarily 10 years since I released the original Tree of Life, but I think it's close enough. So in addition to implementing the spawn island that I was talking about in the time-lapse, I also added a bunch of smaller islands around the circumference of the main platform. Not for any functional reason, but more so to immerse players more in the environment. In addition to that, I can list off a number of new smaller elements, one of them being these 2 new branches at the top of the tree that will serve as teleporter exits for each team. So players can use those to quickly go from the cave level of the map to the canopy. I added a smaller cargo balloon attached to each team's spawn platform. I'm going to contain some building resources on there that players can tap into if necessary. There's also a small campsite I constructed alongside these for each team that again doesn't serve any practical purpose, but makes the general narrative of the map a little more convincing. I never felt like the right waterfall of each lake was especially resolved, so I added some floating rocks and additional boulders around that area to kind of define that a little bit more. There are some small aesthetic changes to, well, really to the entire map, but the underside of the islands in particular, I added some mushrooms, I believe, per the recommendation of Rocky Mine. These mushrooms can actually be used as pathways below the main island, but I'll leave those up to the players to figure out. I think that about covers all the new content that you didn't already see in the time-lapse. That being said, there's still more that I need to do to this map before it can be used on any of the public servers, but all that really comes down to like technical details, like adding items to the chests maybe, and working in some more content that wouldn't be visible or especially interesting to begin with. Assuming I'm able to make some more substantial maps in the future, I'd be more than happy to do something similar for those. So I know this video ended up being like 40 minutes long, but if you enjoyed this process, let me know, and I'll keep that in mind for the future. For the time being, keep an eye out on the public servers for Tree of Life 10th anniversary. Hopefully I can coordinate with the current map developers to get this released in a timely manner. And hopefully it plays at least a little bit better than the original Tree of Life. At the very least, it won't catch fire, so. I should take the opportunity to thank those of you who participated in this map, granted it was only a few of you, but in the grand scheme of things, all of you who I've known since Project Ares forward, all of my friends, collaborators, mentors, fellow staff members who put up with my bullshit. And I'm humbled to know that after all these years, I still have a home in the Overcast community. But yeah, thanks to all of you who have stayed tuned in for this long, and I hope you found this somewhat useful or entertaining. Happy New Year's, and I hope to see you around in the coming months.